The Tide Arbiter's ceremonial blade had not been drawn in 209 years. Quasithinyeval kept it mounted above the command station aboard the Sovereignty unbroken, not for use, never for use, but because the Veth'Oraan understood the grammar of presence. A weapon displayed was a message. A message required no translation. Every subordinate who entered his bridge read the blade and understood, I carry the authority of the tide. I carry what we are. No blade ever needed to leave its casing for the meaning to land. He was thinking about this, the language of symbols, the architecture of implied threat, when Navigator Reketh went still at the forward array. Tide Arbiter. Reketha's secondary eyes contracted to pinpoints. I'm reading a gravity shear at marker 1140. Unscheduled. Mass signature is, a pause Quasithinyeval did not like. Reketh did not pause. Unprecedented. The Sovereignty unbroken was the crown jewel of the Third Expansion Fleet, 4 kilometers of folded hull architecture, 1,100 weapons positions, 3 centuries of naval doctrine written into its superstructure. Quasithinyeval had commanded her for 19 of his 43 cycles. He had never once been surprised on this bridge. He crossed to the sensor array in 6 steps. A single vessel had emerged from null space at marker 1140. Its hull was smooth in the way old scars are smooth, not unblemished, but finished. The mass reading placed it at roughly 1.2 kilometers, a mid-class cruiser at best, by Veth'Oraan standards. Against the 312 warships of the Third Expansion Fleet arrayed across the Veth'Oraan corridor, it was nothing. A stray. A wanderer. Heading, he asked. None registered. It dropped from null space and has not moved. Something lived in Reketha's voice. Quasithinyeval identified it as what he'd heard in junior officers before their first engagement, not fear, but the moment before the body decides if fear is warranted. Tide Arbiter, I don't believe they intended to arrive here. Intentions are derived from evidence. He kept his voice flat with the specific flatness his crew recognized as absolute certainty. Open a hailing frequency. And bring the fleet to combat readiness. Whatever this vessel was, whatever error had sent it stumbling into the heart of Sovereignty space, the answer was the same. 312 warships. 1 wanderer. This was not a problem. This was mathematics. He reached up and touched, only touched, the hilt of the ceremonial blade. Sub-Arbiter Thesuvan appeared at his right shoulder, reading the same data. Unusual configuration. No species in record matches this hull profile. Then we are about to expand the record. This was simply how it worked. It had always been how it worked. 11 minutes of silence. The unknown vessel sat motionless at marker 1140 while the fleet closed formation around it like a fist. No return hail on any of 17 frequencies. No engines lighting. No weapon signatures emerging from that smooth hull. Fleet Speaker Navoral had positioned himself at Quasithinyeval's left with the body posture of someone who had already determined the correct outcome. Tide Arbiter. We have been within weapons range for 4 minutes. The vessel has not responded. Continued restraint begins to resemble weakness? Quasithinyeval offered. Navoral's neck frons stiffened. I was going to say invitation. You weren't. He returned to his station. We wait. What he did not say aloud, because one does not say such things on a bridge, was that the silence itself was wrong. In 40 years of expansion work, he had encountered 7 border incursions. All 7 had responded immediately, some with hostility, some with submission, one with a desperate simultaneous broadcast across every open frequency. None had simply sat there. The craft was not hiding. Its mass was clearly readable. It was not damaged. No radiation leak, no debris field, no uncontrolled drift. It had arrived, decided something, and was now doing that thing, and that thing was nothing. Thesuvin pulled data from the passive array and said, with deliberate care, I'm getting hull composition readings. Very layered. Whoever built this was thinking about energy diffusion at a structural level. These outer plates would absorb roughly 60% of standard munitions impact. 60%, Navarro repeated, as though personally insulted. The inner layers redirect remaining force laterally rather than inward. Thesuvin set down his instrument with a small, careful motion. This vessel was designed to survive being attacked. All warships are, Navarro replied. Not like this. Thesuvin looked at Quasithinyeval and did not elaborate. On the 12th minute, the unknown craft transmitted. Not on any hailing frequency he had tried. An unfamiliar protocol. The translation arrays needed 90 seconds. When the words resolved, they belonged to a species the Sovereignty had observed only from long range across 6 navigational sectors, designated in the archives as Terrans after their homeworld. The voice was female. It was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the journey. This is Commander Aino Makinen of the UNWS Rauha *, Registry UE, 7714. I apologize. We experienced a navigational error and emerged in the wrong location. We are not a threat. We're not transmitting on your standard frequencies because we don't have them catalogued. If anyone can read this on any open channel, we are requesting navigational assistance and safe passage. We don't know where we are. Asterisk. A pause, brief enough that only a trained reader of stress indicators would catch it. We're not here to fight. Silence fell on the Sovereignty unbroken in a way Quasithinyeval had never heard. A deception, Navarro offered carefully. A delay tactic. Quasithinyeval studied the transmission. The voice had not sounded like a deception. It had sounded like something he had no category for, a person who was genuinely lost, genuinely exhausted, and genuinely not interested in anything he had to offer. Have the translation array run secondary stress analysis on that transmission, he said. And pull everything we have on Terran warships. Thesuvin had already started. He wore the expression of someone who has found a problem he intends to take seriously. In Quasithinyeval's experience, that expression was almost always correct. What the archives held on Terran vessels amounted to 8 years of observational data. Distant drive signatures, mathematical hull modeling, 3 intercepted transmissions never prioritized. The Terran homeworld was a biologically chaotic planet in a poorly positioned star system. The species had achieved null-space transit roughly 40 years prior. Young. Unranked. Not a concern. The warship sitting at marker 1140 matched nothing in those 8 years. Thesuvin worked through the deep scan analysis with the focused quiet of someone who has accepted what the numbers are and stopped hoping they will change. He reported without softening. The outer plating contains induction layers beneath the ablative surface. They appear to capture incoming energy and route it to secondary power systems. A pause. The vessel is designed to grow more capable when attacked. He turned to the weapon signature data. The armament profile, the passive reading is considerably larger than the hull profile suggests. Conduit signatures along the entire ventral surface that I initially catalogued as structural support. They are not support. What are they? Weapons. Collapsed and cold. Unpowered. Thesuvin turned to face him directly. If those conduits activated simultaneously, the combined output would exceed the armament of this entire fleet. The bridge did not move. Navarro's necrons had gone completely flat, the involuntary biological response to information the body needs more time than is available to process. Quasithinyeval looked at the ceremonial blade above his station. 209 years unmoved. Carried for what it meant, not what it could do. Every subordinate who entered this bridge understood, without being told, this is the proof of what we are. He had never considered what the undrawn blade said about the civilization that displayed it. She said they're not here to fight, Thasuvan offered quietly. She said they had a navigational error, Nevoril answered. Look at the hull. Thasuvan was steady. The plating shows entry damage consistent with emergence through unstable coordinates. Someone miscalculated. They arrived here by accident. His voice carried something Quasithinyeval rarely heard from him. Tide Arbiter. That vessel could destroy this fleet. And it is sitting there, doing nothing, asking us for directions. He opened the Terran hailing frequency. Commander Mackinnon. This is Tide Arbiter Quasithinyeval of the Veth'Oraan Sovereignty. You are inside our territorial boundary. He paused. Please confirm your vessel's status. The response came in 18 seconds. Tide Arbiter. Thank you for responding. My vessel is intact. My crew. The pause. So brief. The kind that lives in the gap between what a person intends to say and what they find themselves saying instead. I am alone on this vessel. I am the only crew member. We were conducting a solo navigation trial. I made an error. I would appreciate coordinates to the nearest stable null-space corridor, and I will clear your territory within 4 hours. Navigator Reketh turned from the forward array. Tide Arbiter. I have. Hold, Quasithinyeval said. He was listening to what the female voice had not said. 43 cycles in the language of power and the silences that run beneath it. She had not apologized excessively. She had not explained herself. She had not been afraid, or rather, she had been afraid in the contained way of someone who has decided it is not the most pressing thing happening. I am alone on this vessel, she had said, and the pause before it had been the pause of someone moving through a room that used to have furniture. Thasuvan, he said quietly. What does the name Rauha mean? The translation ran silently. It means peace, Tide Arbiter. In a Terran linguistic group called Finnish. He did not move. He did not look at the blade. Bring the full fleet to weapons lock, he said. Complete encirclement. Every vessel. 312 warships took 40 minutes to reach final formation around the Rauha. The largest single fleet action the Sovereignty had conducted in 11 years. By every measure he had ever used, it was an overwhelming declaration. At 22 minutes, as the outer cordon was still maneuvering, Thasuvan said, her tactical systems have come online. Weapons lock? No. Strange quality in the subarbiter's voice. Navigational analysis. She is calculating clear path trajectories for each of our vessels. Evasion routes, Nevoril offered. She's preparing to run. No. Thasuvan watched the readout in silence for a moment. She is calculating where each of our ships would need to be to survive if she engaged her primary systems. She is arranging our fleet so that our losses would be minimized. A breath. I believe this is a routine defensive calculation. Her systems have automatically determined, out of what appears to be established habit, how to reduce our casualties if she were forced to fight. The silence this time was not the silence of unexpected information. It was the silence of people whose understanding of the shape of the situation has been rearranged. Quasithinyeval opened the channel. Commander Mackinnon. You are aware that you are surrounded by the third expansion fleet? Yes. You are aware that we have complete weapons lock? I assumed. You have made no attempt to retreat or to power your weapons systems. He allowed a pause. Why? No calculation in her response. As though the answer had been decided before the question arrived. Because I know what I'm capable of, Tide Arbiter. That's exactly why I won't. Quasithinyeval's neckfronds moved in the involuntary motion his species produced when encountering structural contradiction, when something is simultaneously two incompatible things. He had heard thousands of threatening statements. He had heard submission, negotiation, bluff, desperation. He had heard species face extinction and produce the full range of what fear and pride and denial sound like when forced through a communications array. He had never heard this. He had never heard a commander respond to the presence of total encirclement by naming her own capability, precisely, without boast, without aggression, and then declining it in the same breath. As though power and restraint were not opposites but the same gesture, completed. "Fleet Speaker," he said, his voice level because level was its only setting. "Prepare the engagement signal." "Ready," Navarro replied, with the eagerness of someone who had been ready for 40 minutes. The Rauha transmitted again. Not to him. Not on any directed frequency. An open broadcast, unencrypted, addressed to no one in particular, as though simply releasing something into the air. It was music. Quasithinyeval listened for 6 seconds before he understood what he was hearing. Not the structured tonal patterns of Veth'Oraan ceremony. Not the mathematical constructions the Yaval species employed in their interfleet rituals. This emerged from a single instrument, small, from the resonance profile, something held and drawn against with another implement, and it was, by any technical measurement, simple. Repetitive. Built around a sequence of ascending tones that never quite resolved into the place they seemed to be traveling toward, only to begin again. It was profoundly sad. Not the performed grief of ceremony. Not decorative sorrow placed where sorrow is expected. The kind of sadness that is simply the temperature of a room where someone has been alone for a long time. "What is this?" Navarro said, and for the first time since the Rauha had arrived, he did not sound like someone preparing to give an order. "It's music," Veth'Oraan answered. He had stopped working. He was listening. Quasithinyeval did not stop listening either. Around him, the bridge had quieted in the particular way of beings who have encountered something their professional roles do not have instructions for. After 4 minutes and 30 seconds, he opened the channel. "Commander Mackinnon." He stopped. He had not decided what followed. "I hear you, Tide Arbiter. Why are you transmitting this?" The pause before her answer was not calculation. It was the sound of honesty arriving in the space where deflection would be simpler. "I'm scared," she said. "I find it helps." On the Sovereignty Unbroken, nothing moved. He had prepared for every category of response: aggression, submission, diplomatic maneuvering, silence. He had not prepared for a commander who could erase the Third Expansion Fleet from existence, who had responded to total encirclement by admitting fear, and who had decided that the answer to being afraid was to make something. He looked at Veth'Oraan. Veth'Oraan looked back with the expression of someone who does not yet have words for what he is watching. The music continued. Quasithinyeval looked at the ceremonial blade. 209 years in its casing. Carried so that anyone entering this bridge would know, the capacity exists, it is present, it is real. He had always understood this as a declaration of power. He understood it differently now. He thought about a blade kept for 2 centuries without being drawn, and what it said, not about the blade, but about the hand that chose, every morning for 209 years, to leave it where it was. "I'm scared," she had said. "I find it helps." She was making something beautiful while 1,700 weapons pointed at her hull. She was not preparing to fight. She was not pretending not to be afraid. She was afraid and she was doing the next thing anyway, and the next thing was music, and the music was sad, and she was alone on a vessel named Peace. He sat down in his command chair for the first time since the Rauha had arrived. After a long silence, Reketh said very quietly, "Tide Arbiter." "I have the coordinates she requested. I could transmit them." "Hold," Quasithinyeval said. But his voice, when he said it, was not certain. The engagement signal was ready. Fleet Speaker Navarro needed only the word. Quasithinyeval did not give the word. He sat in his command chair and thought about power, the only subject he had ever truly studied, and thought about it differently than he had thought about anything in 43 cycles. He thought about how the Rauha's tactical systems had automatically calculated survival trajectories for his fleet before calculating attack vectors. As though preservation were the body's first reflex, and destruction the thing that required the additional, deliberate step. He thought about a voice that had said, "I know what I'm capable of," and then stopped there, as though the sentence required no continuation because the action it pointed to was already clear. He thought about music in the silence between 312 warships aimed at a hull that could survive them all. "Engage," said Fleet Speaker Veth'Oraan, and his voice carried the brittle edge of someone whose patience has exhausted itself, and the word was technically addressed to Quasithinyaval but angled in the way of someone testing a boundary they've already decided to test. "No," Quasithinyaval said. The word settled on the bridge like something dropped from a height. Veth'Oraan turned. "Tide Arbiter. What are the protocols governing the forced acquisition of a vessel that has committed no hostile act within sovereignty space?" Quasithinyaval's voice had found its certainty again. Older certainty. A different shape. Fleet Speaker. "Quote them." Veth'Oraan was silent. "There are none," Quasithinyaval answered. "Because we have never needed them. Because no vessel surrounded by this fleet has ever failed to commit a hostile act, because they understood it was the only path left." He watched the Rauha on the forward display, one craft sitting in the geometric center of 312, utterly still. This vessel chose a different path. And I need to understand what that means before I give the order you're waiting for. He opened the channel. "Commander Mackinnon." He did not use his title. He did not know why. "You are going to receive coordinates now. A null space corridor. 4 hours from this position." He paused. "I ask one thing in return." The music had stopped. She was listening. "Tell me why." "Why what, Tide Arbiter? Why you did not fire?" He thought about how to finish the question. "You could have. You knew that. You know we know that." He stopped. "Why?" Silence from the Rauha. Long enough that he thought she would not answer. Then. "My crew is dead, Tide Arbiter. All 47 of them. 6 months ago, on a mission that ended the way yours would have ended if I had fired today. I took this posting alone because I thought I was finished choosing. I thought I would run tests, fill reports, carry the vessel without having to carry any decisions." A breath. Strange to him, the sound a being makes when it holds air in its body and releases it as a form of meaning. "And then I ended up here. And you surrounded me. And I still know exactly what I am capable of." Another breath. "I've already buried 47 people because I was carrying the right weapon at the wrong moment. I will not do it again." Reketh transmitted the coordinates without being told. Quasithinyaval watched the Rauha receive them. Watched it orient toward the nullspace corridor. Watched it begin to move, not with urgency, not with flight, simply with the deliberate motion of something that has made its decision and is now completing it. He gave no order. The fleet simply opened, the way a held breath opens, and the Rauha passed through. At the far edge of sensor range, it folded into null space and was gone. The Sovereignty unbroken remained in the corridor for 3 hours after the Rauha departed, on no formal order, simply because Quasithinyaval had not commanded the fleet to move and no one had yet asked him to. Fleet Speaker Veth'Oraan filed a formal incident report and requested a review of the engagement decision. This was his right. He did it professionally and without audible anger, which told Quasithinyaval more about Veth'Oraan's unease than any anger would have. Thesuvan dismantled and rebuilt his passive scan analysis of the Terran warship 4 times, searching for errors in his own numbers. He did not find any. He filed his technical assessment without commentary and did not speak about it further. In the communications archive, beneath the formal transmissions and tactical logs and Veth'Oraan's incident notation, there was one additional record. Navigator Reketh had cued the nullspace coordinates for transmission at the 43rd minute of the encounter, 7 minutes before Quasithinyaval had agreed to provide them. He had queued them. He had not transmitted without authorization. But the intent had been entered, logged, time-stamped. He had already decided. Long before the decision was made, in the space where obedience and conscience share the same narrow corridor, Reketh had already decided. Quasithinyaval read that notation once. He did not delete it. He did not mention it. The report the Rauha filed upon returning to Terran space would reach the appropriate desks within 48 hours, and within 14 months, the Sovereignty would receive the first of 7 diplomatic overtures that would take another 11 years to become something worth calling peace. That is the version in the historical record. That is the version with all the numbers and citations and formal designations. That version does not mention music. Quasithinyaval stood at the forward display for a long time after the rest of the bridge had resumed its ordinary work around him, watching empty space. He thought about Commander Aino Makinen, alone in a vessel named after the concept of peace, arriving in the wrong place, surrounded by everything capable of ending her, and choosing, not from weakness, not from the absence of power, but from something older and more deliberate than power. To sit in the center of it and make something small and sad and true. He thought about what it meant to carry a weapon without drawing it. What it said about the one who carried it. He thought about 47 people, buried. And one person still moving through the corridor. He reached up. His hand rested against the casing of his ceremonial blade, the weapon unmoved for 209 years, kept so every officer who entered this bridge would understand, the capacity is here, it is real, it exists. He had always understood this as a declaration of power. He had built 43 cycles on that understanding. He understood it differently now. He understood that the statement was never about the weapon. It was about the hand that rested against the casing every morning for 209 years, and chose, each time, to walk away.